Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the Mayor of Clarence to perform the ownership. Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much. To open proceedings tonight, I'd like to invite Captain Michelle Miles from the Clarence City Salvation Army to open with a prayer. Thank you.
Let's pray. Father, this evening I just pray that these wise people, that you give them wisdom and you give them grace. You give them open hearts and minds to listen to each other, but most importantly, just to remember why they're here. Amen.
Thank you very much. And before proceeding, I'd like to acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal community as the traditional custodians of the land we're meeting on tonight, and to pay respects to elders past and present. Also remind everyone that tonight's meeting is being recorded audio visually, and it will be available on our website to review later should you wish. Thank you. Declare the meeting open, and we have an apology from Alderman McFarlane. Item 2, confirmation of minutes from the 1st of February as circulated, will be taken as read and confirmed. Thank you, Alderman Chong. Seconded, Alderman Cusick. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Nothing to report at item 3. Item 4 is that Council notes the workshops on the 9th and 15th of February in the agenda brief on the 19th of February. Thank you, Alderman Pearce. Seconded, Alderman Von Berto. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Item 5 is declarations of interests of Alderman or close associate.
11.3.2, Mr Mayor.
Pardon me?
11.3.2.
Thank you. Any other declarations of interest? Item 6, tabling of petitions. There's nothing on the agenda. Are there any petitions from the floor? Item 7 is public question time. We have nothing on notice. However, there's an answer at 7.3 to a previous question taken on notice by Mr Stephen Herity. GM, would you like to just read out the answer there, please?
The answer that Clarence City Council requests the Department of State Growth for a shared multi-user pathway along the South Arm Highway from Oak Downs to Lauderdale.
Thank you. That'll be available in the minutes. Item 7.4 is questions from the public without notice. There being none. Item 8 is deputations by members of the public. General Manager.
Mr Mayor, we have one speaker tonight, Clarissa Leary.
I'm always obliged to point out to speakers that there's an opportunity for 3 minutes only, and there'll be a warning at 30 seconds to go.
Yeah.
Thanks.
It was just in regards to the tourism accommodation at 474 Mount Romney Road.
If you're able to.
Sorry, just one of the I'm one of the owners. So we just wanted to say that it's a really beautiful area, and we really wanted to share the natural environment and the farm experience with other people. We have one cabin on there at the moment, and the people that have come really enjoy the experience. It's very close to a lot of services on the Eastern Shore here, and we think that would be a really better impact on the Clarence area. It's very consistent with the government in aiming to increase visitor numbers for Tasmania. And our intention is to provide a legacy and jobs for our children. We have a little girl who's Down syndrome, so we'd like to leave her something when she grows up. And that's all. Thanks.
Item 9 is motions on notice. 9.1, Alderman von Berto.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mayor, I would actually like to make a slight change to the motion that's been tabled, and that change is an addition of a few words so that it would read that the Mayor, on behalf of the Council, writes to the Minister for Communication, Senator the Honourable Mitch Byfield, and the Australian Communications and Media Authority seeking advice on the following matters, and they are listed there. So,
Do we have a seconder, please? Thank you, Alderman Thurley.
Mr Mayor and Alderman, I'd just like to give you the genesis of this motion on notice. I was actually contacted by a member of the public in relation to this matter, and when you look at it initially you might think that it's unrelated to local government. However, also when you look at section 20 of the Local Government Act, Council is actually responsible for functions to provide for the health, safety and welfare of the community, and B, to represent and promote the interests of the community. So I believe that I actually needed to follow up on this and therefore discuss this matter with the General Manager. And he felt that the correct protocol was to actually bring it to Council to further the issue and to actually perhaps get a solution to the situation. So that you're aware, digital radio is actually available in all of the capital cities of Australia apart from Hobart. The other capital cities have had it since either 2009 or 2010. And Hobart, being part of Tasmania, is actually considered regional rather than metropolitan. So digital radio has been actually rolled out to the metropolitan capital cities, whereas we are considered a regional capital city. And as I've listed in the actual explanatory notes, there are a number of reasons for digital radio being provided, and they are listed there. They actually cover that there's better quality and that also there are better options provided by digital radio, and particularly for those who have hearing problems. I want to thank Alderman James. In our briefing on Friday, he actually suggested that we involve the Local Government Association of Tasmania and the Southern Tasmanian Councils Authority in lobbying for digital radio within Tasmania, and particularly within the Greater Hobart area and obviously specifically Clarence. I think at this stage in proceedings it's perhaps best to get our Mayor to actually write to the Minister and to the authority and to actually be provided with the latest information in relation to those two questions. So what are the current plans, if any, for the provision of digital radio spectrum availability in Hobart and Southern Tasmania, and what are the likely timelines for the provision of digital radio in Hobart and Southern Tasmania? When we get the answer to that, depending on what that answer is, then I believe it may be appropriate
to actually refer it on to either Legat and perhaps and/or Legat and the STCA. I feel that this motion involves very little officer time. In essence, the letter is written with the dot points that are here, and I believe that it's very important that that letter should come from the Mayor. And that's why I've added those words. And I commend the motion and seek your support. Thank you.
Alderman Dowst.
I support the motion, Mr Mayor, on the basis that this is an upgrade which is, I think, probably essential to our community. It has certain advantages over the other wavelengths, AM and FM. You've got more choice of stations, you've got a niche formats, you've got clearer reception, you've got exceptional sound quality, and as well as that you've got pause and replay, so I support the motion.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The comment that was made by Alderman Bomberto in relation to Friday's briefing was on the understanding that this fee referred to the LGAT or the Southern Tasmanian Councils Associations, because I personally think that this is a community issue which doesn't necessarily separate Clarence from the other councils of Southern Tasmania. It was interesting that Alderman Bomberto mentioned the section of the Local Government Act when it said that one of its functions, and this council's functions together with other councils, is for the health and well-being of the community and also to promote the interests of the community. Alderman Bomberto also mentioned about one person that had contacted her, and as a result of that, it would seem that this particular matter has come to council for consideration. I believe, Mr Mayor, that we ought to endeavour to keep to our core projects, and this is a deviation from that. We are, in my view, steering away from what I think are our core projects, and this isn't one of them, because it's basically setting the scene for us to become involved in an issue which ought to be taken on by the councils collectively or the state government. The addition of those words that she has added to the motion, that the Mayor, on behalf of council rights, set to the Minister for Communications, that can be done on any basis, I think. It doesn't necessarily, in my view, mean that we need to have a decision on this. So, in summary, as I mentioned in the debate when the matter of electric cars was discussed at the last meeting, and I said then that it was necessary, in my view, that ought to be part of the brotherhood, sisterhood relationship that we have with other councils through the STCA or the Local Government Association, to take this on board to benefit not just Clarence but the whole community. I do not support the motion.
I find myself somewhere between Alderman Bomberto and Alderman James on this matter. My preference would have been that it was something that we were passing to STCA, and it being collectively, well, not STCA actually, LGAT would have been the pinnacle forum to be doing this and doing it for the state. It's a bit different from the issue at the last council meeting. Digital radio isn't a public subsidy for an individual benefit. It is a community-wide benefit when it comes along. One of the reasons why perhaps people haven't been banging down the doors demanding it is because in the case of Tasmania, we don't actually know what we're missing. We haven't been used to the benefits of it, and if we'd had it and it had been taken away, I think there'd be, people would be marching in the streets almost for it. So I am going to support the motion because I think that digital radio is the way to go. Would have been my preference that it was just going through LGAT, but that in and of itself isn't enough reason not to vote for it.
Right, reply, Alderman Bomberto. The motion is then as slightly modified. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Item 10 is reports from outside bodies. First of all, reports from single and joint authorities, and in regard to the Southern Tasmanian Council's authority, the December quarterly report is pending. Copying refuse disposal site, joint authority, Alderman Campbell.
Yes, Mr Mayor, the two outstanding reports will be in the next agenda you receive, and the other thing I'd like to report is that the earthworks for the sea cell are out for tender at present, and tender will close on the 7th of March, and we're still looking for a completion date for the whole project by the 30th of June.
Southern Waste Strategy Authority, Alderman James.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. As noted on the agenda notice, the report September-December quarter is pending.
And in regard to Tasmanian Water Corporation, there's no reports to submit, but I can advise that in regard to the Lauderdale residents and the caveat that the board has considered that, and they are keen to pursue it, but they are in negotiations with the state government on particular aspects of that. So they haven't got a decision yet, but I'm hopeful that's not too far away. Reports from council and special committees and other representative bodies. First of all, we've got the Bicycle Steering Committee, and that the chairman's report be received. Alderman Bonberto. Do you have a seconder, please? I think discussion or debate? Questions? Put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. And similarly with the Tracks and Trails Advisory Committee, Alderman James.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I would just like to make one comment with respect to the Rocky Tom property at 429 Flagstaff Gully Road. It's there in black and white. The property has been sold, and council is negotiating with the owners, and I'll advise council in due course, and I seek council support. Thank you.
Seconder, thank you, Alderman Chong. Any questions? Discussion, put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Are there any other reports? Alderman Bonberto, I think, first.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to table the agenda for the Regional Waste Group meeting. Perhaps I should explain, the Regional Waste Group is a group of the Southern Tasmanian Council's Authority, a newly formed group, and this is the agenda for the meeting that occurred on Tuesday the 16th of February, but included in it is the minutes of the meeting of the 1st of December 2015. And just an overview for you, the two meetings that I have attended with one of our officers from Council, the group has actually looked at terms of reference for the group and also a budget for the coming year, so a draft budget. And obviously you'll be able to see the details of those two matters. They are the primary issues that have been covered in that those meetings, and what will happen now is the actual recommendations will go to the STCA board. I'm of the understanding that will be on the 2nd of March, and then, depending on the decision of the board, the STCA will be writing to all of the member council detailing the terms of reference and the budget, the draft budget, and then there will be a presentation to each of the councils from Mayor Vincent, who's the chair of the Waste Management Group, and Brenton West, who's the executive officer of the STCA. So that will be aware of where that management group is actually coming from. Just for your information. Thank you.
Yeah, Mayor, I've got the February minutes of the Windstar Community Activities set. I'd like to present those to Council.
Alderman Hume.
Yeah, I'd like to table the December minutes of the Business East Board of Management meeting, and having been a bit tardy, the November minutes as well.
I have the Belrive Community Arts Centre February minutes, but I will have to forward them to you by email. Thank you.
There being no other reports. Item 11.1, that the info in the weekly briefing reports of the 1st, 9th and 15th of February be noted. Thank you, Alderman Hume. Seconded, Alderman Thurley. Any questions on the weekly briefing reports? In that case, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. (11.2.1) is the determination of a petition for sports ground lighting, and notes the intent and advises that the petitioners will be advised after a planning decision. Thank you, Alderman Chong. Seconded. Alderman Thurley. Any discussion? Put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. I now advise the Council intends to sit as a planning authority under the Land Use Planning and Approval Act of 1993. Item 11.3.1 is a development application for 474 Mount Rumney Road for a new dwelling and a change of use to tourist accommodation with 11 cabins.
Well, through you, Mr Mayor, there's a slight change to the recommendation.
Okay.
Pick that up. And that's all been circulated and it's on the Alderman, in front of the Alderman.
Can you summarise what it is, please?
Yes, I'll just pass you over to Bruce to...
No, you're not mixing up with Matt.
Sorry, Mayor. I've got it. Yes, I am.
Okay. All right. There being no change, the officer's recommendation is as reported in the agenda. Do I have a move and a seconder, please? Thank you, Alderman Thurley. Seconder, Alderman Hume. Thank you. Would you like to speak to the motion?
I made note of the fact that this is being assessed under the current planning scheme, and the conditions of 2007 aren't relevant to this, which I note has been an objection in relation to that. Also too, I think as a council we're aware that Mount Rumney Road isn't the best of roads in our municipality, and I would like to see that addressed at some later issue, but that is not applicable and not influenced by this development application. As the development application stands, I see no reason at all to refuse it under the planning scheme.
Mayor, as Alderman Thurley pointed out, there have been issues raised about this application in regards to road safety. I understand that the application has been assessed by council engineers, and they don't see that any increased traffic movements resulting from the application are likely to have a significant impact on safety. There were also concerns raised about a private road in Acton Court, and there are conditions being placed on the application to address that in the recommendation, and I support those conditions. I understand that that was something that was agreed with the developer, and that should address those issues. So if I understand correctly from my memory of the report, it was that visitors to the accommodation would be encouraged to enter via Mount Rumney Road via signage, and the private road would only be used for service vehicles. There were also some issues in relation to impacts on fauna and flora. There is some vegetation removal, but I understand that a lot of that mostly involves ground clearing, and that the removal of standing vegetation is actually quite minimal. Most of the accommodation will be built within existing clearings, and the vegetation removal is mainly for access ways. It complies with the planning scheme and support the application.
James.
Mr Mayor, it doesn't support the planning scheme. The question in relation to page 29 says the proposal meets the scheme's relevant acceptable solutions, and then it goes on to say that with the exception of the following. Now, I'd like to refer Council to 14.3.2A1, and in our planning scheme there are a number of performance criteria that have not been addressed in the officer's report with respect to the performance criteria 1A, B, C and D. And rather go through those in detail, may I say that the planning scheme has a number of acceptable solutions, and then it has a qualification that can give the council discretion to deviate from those acceptable solutions, because in the officer's opinion, it means that their view that it is not a marked deviation from the acceptable solutions. Under 14.3.3, performance criteria P1 has been covered in the officer's report. However, it does not address A, B, C and D, and A says the visitor accommodation must satisfy all of the following, A, B, C and D. A, not adversely impact upon residential amenity and privacy of adjoining properties. In the officer's report, there's no mention of those words to that degree as Part A, and furthermore Part C is that the visitor accommodation must satisfy all of the following. I mentioned A, B, C, be of an intensity that respects the character and use of the area. So in actual fact, the officers, in my view, have been selective in their performance criteria in giving justification for the deviation from 14.3 to A1. If we go down to the other item on page 30 and look at 14.4.2, in 14.4.2 there is a number of performance criteria that are covered under that acceptable solutions, and the officers have mentioned only a couple of those. The dwelling is sufficiently removed from the adjacent lot that overlooks any future development should reasonably be achieved, whereas in 4.4.2 it has building setbacks from frontage must satisfy all the following. It goes into A, B, C, D, E, and therefore there are other aspects of this that should have been brought to account, but in my view the officers may have selected one or two of these and therefore based their argument or their reasoning on why we should deviate on that basis and not on those other aspects of it. So look, I am supportive of development of this nature, but we have a new planning scheme, we have performance criteria, and they are basically what determines a discretion to be utilised by the council. In this instance, there are a number of factors about the impact on the residential community, on the environment, facilities, and a host of other matters that I believe should have been addressed and spelt out in the officer's report to address not just one aspect of the performance criteria, but the whole box and cadoodle.
I cannot support this motion because I believe it is not in the best interest of the adjoining neighbours. It's impacting upon the residential and environmental aspects of the community, and also too, it doesn't meet the density requirements as listed in our new planning scheme.
Are there any other speakers? Alderman Bomberto.
Mayor, there's a theme that runs through the officer's report, which, as Alderman James actually says, perhaps specifically doesn't deal with each of the aspects of the various performance criteria. However, it needs to be looked at holistically. In terms of density, it's made very clear by the report that this sized lot is actually in excess by 3 times the minimum lot size. It also makes it very clear across the report that there is minimal vegetation clearance, and it also makes it very clear that this is a clustered development within a very big area. And it is also a staged development. So with those aspects in mind, and also, as we have discussed, when you get to the performance criteria as compared to the acceptable solutions, it's about a judgment call. And obviously the officers have expertise in the planning area, but they are required to make a judgment call. And then it comes to us, and we are required to make a judgment call. However, when we make our judgment call, we need to be very clear in terms of our reasons why we are making a judgment call that is different to the officers. And I've heard from a number of aldermen that they believe that the judgment call that has been made using the performance criteria that are required to be considered, they believe that the officers have actually given ample and appropriate reasons. And on that basis, I actually support the recommendation. Thank you.
I agree with Alderman Bomberto. We need to be balanced in any assessments we make. We need to have a holistic approach, a common sense approach to development, and as such on a 61 hectare site I think it's an appropriate development. I support the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Mayor. I concur with the last 2 speakers. I think it's a very big site. I think the officers have done a good job interpreting the issues raised. Now, for a starter, I had a couple of issues, not so much with this application, but I think people have already raised the condition of the road, which again is not with this development, but I am concerned about it. Pedestrian safety, again, it is not with this application, but I am concerned about a couple of things there. But the application for this development, I think, is very good. And I think the officers have done exceptionally well in determining the questions and the objections raised. So I think this will be a very good development, and a staged development, and I think we should support it.
Okay. It is a judgment call, and I note the officers' recommendations, and I think fundamentally once you read the application and read it again, they do stack up. So what are the spin-offs aside from that? Well, the fact that the road is now coming up as a conversation, I think is a good thing. It is, you know, somewhat of an opportunity to improve. This is a project that is bringing accommodation to a municipality that has got quite a shortage of accommodation, and in probably quite a strategic spot as far as that goes as well. Separate to that, I guess it might also stimulate whether the actual observatory area of Mount Rum is all that it could be, because from my perspective it certainly isn't. I think for not a lot of infrastructure that could be quite an attractive area to go. At the moment it's a bit tight and it's not the best panorama. So that's something I look forward to in the future, possibly even a food van on top of there serving a coffee as well.
Any other speakers? Okay, right a reply, Alderman Thurley.
I think we've heard quite good debate around the table tonight. What particularly pleases me about this development is that we're addressing a bushfire hazard management situation. We all know that Mount Romney, it's quite a woody area, it's quite prone to bushfire. This plan has ensured that the internal roads are upgraded. That provides better service for everybody. The developer is required to do that prior to commencing the development, and I think this is a tick in the box for the Council's thorough addressing of all the issues that have raised, and I recommend this for acceptance.
Thank you. So the recommendation is for approval with subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Sorry. I'll put the vote again. All those in favour?
Please do. Please do.
I must admit I was surprised the other day.
You were swayed by them.
Against?
Thank you.
Carried.
Recorded.
I thought you'd been persuaded by somebody jealous.
I was impressed by that.
11.3.2 is a development application at 25 Wentworth Street, Bellerive for sports ground lighting. Alderman Thurley, thank you. Second up, Alderman Cusick. Would you like to speak to the motion?
I would like to speak to the motion. I have empathy for those that live nearby Wentworth Park, Blunston Arena and this particular oval. But these grounds are not utilised 24/7. They do spend a lot of time idle when children are in school and when adults are at work. And whilst the noise of people utilising these facilities can be bothersome for some, the joy of experiencing the silence at 9 p.m. at night or 5 p.m. on a Saturday and Sunday must be even more apparent once the so-called noise goes away. But it's actually a noise that should bring joy into the hearts of those around, because it's not a bad noise, it's a good noise. It's a noise of people participating in something that is going to add health and well-being to the community. And research has shown that the importance of physical activity in children is getting stronger than ever. And it's organised sport, not just exercise, that gives a child more than just physical well-being. It contributes to a child's development, psychologically and socially. The development of these facilities afford greater opportunity for increased participation, and that's what this is about. This is enabling the grounds to be used in winter and also for extended use during the day. 2015, La Trobe University did a study which determined the social value of a typical community club. And for every dollar invested, there is 4.4 return in social value. And the social connectedness, well-being and mental health status, employment outcomes, personal development, physical health, all of these things. And as an alderman, I recognise the value and I support this contribution from our Eastern Shore Club. Now, having worked in the sports ground area, I'm acutely aware of the shortfall of sports grounds in our city to readily meet the participation levels and to cope with all levels of competition and training, junior or senior. And the relationship that's been developed between state and council in this particular instance is a great example of collaboration between two levels of government to really provide a good facility for the community. And it brings joy to me when I drive past and see all of those children participating. Also, I have a feel for Clarence Football Club, who are denied their what has been their traditional facilities as a result of AFL football entering our community, for them to at last have a facility that they can have some winter training, pre-season training. So, fully support this.
As with Alderman Thurley, I can empathise with some of the residents, but I believe overall this will be a community benefit. As I understand, through some negotiation there have been some changes. I think the lights will be turned off at 9 o'clock. And bearing in mind this is a training facility, not a competition facility, and the strength of the lights are only to a training capacity, not a competition capacity, and I think it'll be a community benefit. I support it.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Acceptable solutions on page 82 of our report, and it deals with building height. The acceptable solution is 10 metres, where what's being proposed is 27 metres. And the officer's report and comments with respect to performance criteria 1 of clause 17.4.1, and I quote, "There is no desired future character statements provided for the area," whereas in our planning scheme under performance criteria P1, building height must satisfy all of the following: A, be consistent with any desired future character statements provided for the area. So already, okay, there's none, and whereas our planning scheme says there should be. So that's the first performance criteria that's been identified in our planning scheme, and that hasn't been met with respect to 17.4.1 building height. The other interesting thing about this is that the officers have identified building height when we're we're talking about lights. So I can only surmise that there's no reference specifically in our new planning scheme that there is a section dedicated to the height of lights, other light bulbs. The light can go up to X degrees. So they have zeroed in on building height as part of the acceptable solutions, and the acceptable solutions to ensure that the building height contributes positively to the streetscape and does not result in unreasonable impact on residential amenity of land and residential zone. So we've got buildings versus light poles, and so I assume that there is no reference in the planning scheme to light poles, so they've gone to the building height. But also, so if you're taking it to the next step, under performance criteria, there is part B, it has to be compatible with the scale of nearby buildings. Now, the officer's report, dot point 2, the proposal is for light poles, as they say, which require a building permit, but cannot reasonably be compared to buildings. So, on the one hand, they've zeroed in on the building height in the planning scheme, and then on the other hand, they're saying that it cannot be reasonably compared to buildings. So you've got this interesting scenario of the acceptable solutions is that the height is 10 metres, that's the standard, and then what's being proposed is 27 metres. And then when you go to the guts of the issue and look at performance criteria, it doesn't address it at all. It doesn't meet the consistent with any desired future character statements provided for the area, nor does it talk about it cannot be compared to buildings, when in fact they have identified it as buildings. So, Mr Mayor, I cannot support this. I think we are really, really pushing the boundaries here of what we can say is acceptable solutions and the performance criteria associated with it. But it's apples and pears, not apples with apples.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor. Maybe we should just get back to a bit of reality. It was a great move by local and state governments to take on Clarence High Oval as a sporting achievement of the city. Now, one of the things is we've sent, well, it wasn't their doing, but we've sent Clarence Football Club to train in winter on this ground. So obviously they're going to need some lights. Now, the fact is, by having the light poles so high, which is great, because the fact is we only need 4 poles. 4 poles, the higher you go, the greater spread of light on the oval, which saves us putting 2,000 light poles up everywhere. This is the only solution that I believe is sensible, very sensible, because as we can see on the diagram here, there's only 4 poles which will light up this ground and not neighbouring houses. So I think the officers have done another great job, and I think this council tonight should support this unanimously.
Other speakers? Alderman Walker.
Yes, look, I do support the work that we have been doing with the State Education Department to optimise the usage of grounds. I support what we've done with Clarence. I certainly support what we've done with Gilston Bay, and I suspect there are some other opportunities as we go along. That said, if there was, and there probably is, an award for awesomeness in local government, I'd hardly recommend the management of each and every piece of infrastructure that we've installed on this site in relation to local athletics. I voted against the March 2015 installation of the cage around the long jump. And I suspect if some of those aldermen years past were told that in 30 years' time tens of thousands of dollars would be spent putting money over to build this cage around a long jump area instead of just a plain cover, they would really wonder what a weird world the future was. And I'm going to ask this question because it's germane, because it is the site, but just how much money, through you, Mr Mayor, to Mr Lovell, how much money have we spent to date on that cage? I'm happy to take that one on notice. And then as a follow-up to that, perhaps you might be able to enlighten us on any maintenance issues we've had with the cage and if you're aware of any issues with it at present.
Through Mr Mayor, we had one issue where the sliding gate was damaged by some vandals and had to be repaired.
But I think we're getting slightly outside the ambit of whether we approve the lights here or not.
The precinct
and quite happy to take questions of that nature and questions towards the end of the meeting.
Right. Well, look, I think I've highlighted that we haven't done everything quite right with this site, but we're coming now to the issue of the lights. Now, if you look at it against the criteria, there's not really a lot of reason at all for refusal if you're of that inclination. My preference would have been to harmonise the time of usage alongside with Lindisfarne. We've chosen not to do that, and I will be supporting this project, but I think not everything we've done on that site has covered us with glory, and we might need to reflect on some of that.
The other speakers. Alderman Bomberto.
Yeah, I won't go over the points that many of the other aldermen have actually covered, but I think it's really important to note that this project has actually come out of the Council's Sport and Active Recreation Strategy, which was adopted by the Council unanimously, I must admit apart from me because I was elsewhere, on the 5th of May 2014. And as it says in one of the other items that has been on the agenda tonight in relation to the petition, as far as this matter is concerned, it actually, within that decision, noted that there was to be an adoption of a demand management approach for sporting facilities that includes develop management plans for each sport and active recreation holding in accordance with Council's open space strategy principles, assess synthetic surfaces for sporting codes to encourage extended usage, and the pertinent one for tonight is improve lighting facilities to encourage extended usage. And it goes on to list some other items as well. So I think it's important to note the context in which this development application has come to us. It's also important to note that all of the acceptable solutions, apart from two, have actually been met, and these two relate to the actual time of the lighting and also the aspect of the height. In terms of the height, it actually depends on the definition of building, and therefore, if you like, an extended interpretation of the definition of building has been taken here to look at the light poles in terms of, if you like, infrastructure building, and that's how it's been interpreted. So I think it's really important to note that yes, there are representations and yes, they have valid issues, but when you put them in light of this planning scheme with these acceptable solutions and performance criteria, the reasoning behind the performance criteria is that. Thank you.
Want to reply?
As we've all observed, the proposal is for light poles, which do happen to require a building permit, but they really can't reasonably be compared to buildings. So I found that we didn't need to necessarily dwell on that. The height being 27 metres has enabled, as Alderman Walker pointed out, only 4 poles. Sorry.
Alderman Pearce.
Alderman Pearce. But the old method to provide the lighting, there was a series of low poles around 14 metres, which would have quite easily satisfied that the height of buildings, but totally inadequate. Cast shadows all over the ground, actually interfered with neighbouring properties. This is to create the lack of light spill onto adjacent properties. So it's a far better scenario for everyone to consider. And I fully support this application. And might I point out that the issue of the cage is totally irrelevant to the issue of lighting here that we're discussing tonight.
The motion is the officer's recommendation, subject to conditions and advice. Approval. All those in favour? Against? Carried. And could we recall Alderman Hume, please? .3.3 is a development application at 36 Lincoln Street, Lindisfarne, the first of two tonight. This one is an amendment to a previously approved plans.
Through you, Mr Mayor, the applicant has requested that it be deferred while he goes away and reconsiders his proposal.
Do we need a motion to accept that, or is it something that's automatic?
Something regarded as automatic, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Okay. So item 11.
Just on a point of order.
Yes, Alderman Jay.
If anybody was to check the minutes and see that there was no decision or no resolution to the effect that this matter has been deferred, they are more than in the well, they just don't know what's happening.
Well, perhaps the minutes could recall that the General Manager, Acting General Manager, reported that the applicant had withdrawn.
I think that needs to be said because somebody may challenge, and so why was that not debated?
I think it's quite a valid point, and thank you for that, and we'll ensure the minutes record the reasons. .3.4 is a development application, once again for 36 Lincoln Street, this time for a canopy. Thank you, Alderman Cusick. Seconder?
Alderman Burley. Speakers?
No, I just recommend that the Alderman support this application.
Thank you.
I think whilst I've never really been happy with yellow, bright yellow and blue in the midst of our neighbourhood, I find it a bit ghastly. I do agree with the provision of this to the entrance because it's an exposed area there. There are no doubt a number of elderly people that need to get to, and it adds to the comfort of the shopping experience for those that do want to shop at Chemist Warehouse.
Other speakers, Alderman Walker?
Look, I am supporting the canopy. I think that it's a value add of sorts. But I'm also taking the opportunity while it's in my head to ask council officers to look at the parking almost directly outside that area because we've now created an all-day park.
But once again, can we pick this up in questions at the end?
I've only got 2 questions. I've got to get them in where I can.
Any other speakers? Right of reply? I'll put the motion then, which is a recommendation for approval subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Against? Carried. 11.3.5 is for a development application at 27 Franklin Street, Richmond, for a dwelling. Thurley, seconder. Alderman Hume, thank you. Alderman Thurley, would you like to speak to the motion?
I wasn't necessarily prepared to speak to the motion. I've probably done enough speaking to motions, but I've obviously read the report. I've looked at all of the diagrams. I've looked at all the maps. I support the application. I support the officer's report, and I think it will add to the amenity of the area.
Any other speakers? Alderman James.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Sorry, Alex. The circular that's been provided to us from the representative, and I just can't pick up where. Oh, Cooper, thank you, Alderman Chong. Yes, look, I suppose in a nutshell what she's saying is that it's a large block and the shed is basically sandwiched, well, in the very corner of the block, and any, I suppose, reasonable person would say, well, look, why couldn't that be moved to another area within the block so that at least it could be seen as a benefit to all. And a colleague spoke this evening about the amenity and how the family would appreciate consideration in relation to this. And I think in a nutshell her objection is to the setback on the rear boundary from the from the acceptable solution of 4 metres to 2.6. There are other matters here that have been raised and performance criteria spelt out, and I don't want to go through those, but there's performance criteria to the acceptable solutions for 10.4.2 A3 of the planning scheme, 10.4.3 A2 of the planning scheme, 10.4.4 A1 the sunlight, the planning scheme, E13.8.1 A1 of the planning seeking deviation, just use that word, from the planning scheme. So look, it just reads and so on page 122. Another one, E13.8.2, it's Uncle Tom Cobley and all here. You know, you've just about covered the acceptable solutions in our new planning scheme from 10.4 to E13 to E13 8.2 A1 and so on. So the planners have sat down and worked through the acceptable solutions and therefore exercised their judgment, to use that word that's been mentioned tonight, their judgment in relation to why they have felt that it's not appropriate in using or in referring to the performance criteria, and therefore have come up and recommended this for approval. It's sad because common sense would prevail, and I use that word because it's already been mentioned here tonight. So I've gone away from the dictum, if you want to call it that, in relation to the planning scheme, and just looked at this from a common sense point of view. It's a big ask, I know, to actually suggest to my colleagues that they take on board just one aspect of the acceptable solution, which refers to the setback variation. But there are others there which they could consider as being worthy enough to give this the thumbs down. So I will not be supporting this. I'll be supporting its inclusion on two grounds. Firstly, a common sense point of view of where everybody would be happy if this shed was moved somewhere up the block away from the boundary. And secondly, on the number of references to the acceptable solutions and the performance criteria that the officers have put forward in their report.
Thanks, Alderman Grant. Other speakers, Alderman Pearson.
Alderman James, I'll support you 100%. I've written down here again, common sense. The rear setback 2.2 metres on a block of land is 1,400 square metres. I'm still confused as to why this could not be remedied by moving another 2.2 metres. We don't seem to have been given any real explanation. The proposed building would not overshadow the bulk of the buildings below ground level, etc. But it still doesn't tell us why it couldn't be moved another 2.2 metres. I support Miriam Cooper.
Thank you.
Other speakers? Alderman Walker.
Question to you, or through you, Mr Mayor, to Mr Gibbs. Are you aware of were reasons provided as to why there is a request to deviate from the setback, and would you just refresh us onto what those grounds were given as to why that setback was requested?
The applicant did give an sort of rationale as to why they were requesting that setback. It's just really where they wanted to site shed.
Your years of expertise in planning, looking at that site, does there appear to be space for that shed to be at the 4 metre setback, or would that make that project unviable?
It could be original.
Okay. Normally on these issues I tend to go with the officers and recommend that it moves forward. In this case, it's not just a simple not in my backyard, it's more not impair my B&B and business. And it's not a request to torpedo the whole project. It's not a request that each and every other stipulation be adhered to. It's just to say that on this one aspect, I'm just asking for the minimum, or the standard, if you like, the vanilla option to be applied. I suspect if we do reject this, if it was to come straight back to us at that new boundary, it would be a walk on through. And as such, I am in the same position as Alderman James on this.
Any other speakers? Alderman Pearce.
Again, Mayor, a fairly large block of land, and I look at the representations. There's two. Rear setback variation, well, we've discussed that. Excavation required for buildings, well, that's not a really planning issue. Use of proposed outbuilding, well, again, that's not really a planning issue because obviously it's going to be used for something. And location of easement. Now, in the report it said the easement's not on 27 Franklin Street. I don't disagree with what Alderman James and Walker have said, and somehow I'm not going to refuse this recommendation because of that. I mean, it'd be great if some compromise could be done and this shed can be moved. But other than that, the other representations really
do not come into it. There's only the rear setback that really does come into it. And I'm not going to recuse this just because of that. I hope some compromise can be made because, as we've said, it is a very big block. But, you know, I can't be telling you what to actually do. So.
Other speakers? Right, a reply, Alderman Thurley.
We've noted that the proposed outbuilding is going to be within an excavated area at the rear of the site, and that would assist in the reduction of the impact of this shed, and that is fairly relevant. I think it's important to point out that this planning scheme is no different to the other planning scheme in the sense that there's always the ability to exercise discretion, and we keep hearing about acceptable solutions and all these words are floating around as if we've lost our ability to apply discretion, and we haven't. And in this case, the Council's Heritage Officer has advised that the placement of the building would minimise impact on the values of Heritage Precinct, and the building would be located in an excavated area which would lower the height of the building above natural ground level. So I'm quite satisfied that this proposal should be supported.
Motion before the Chair is the officer's recommendation for approval with conditions and advice. All those in favour? Against? 2, 5. I think it's carried. 6-5. 11.3.6 is a development application at 476 South Arm Road, Lauderdale, for alterations and extensions to a shopping centre. Thank you, Alderman James. Seconded, Alderman Campbell.
Mr Mayor, I'll be brief. This site has been fairly vacant, if that's the term, over the years, ever since pretty small, pretty vacant. I think that's better. Ever since that small service station on the southern boundary was shut down and so forth, and there's been some activity with some units up on the northern end of it. But other than that, there's very little activity, and I think this will do. Well, the development will enhance the area and fill that missing link as far as Lauderdale is concerned.
Other speakers? Alderman Doust.
Mr Mayor, I've been looking at this site over the years many times, and it's sort of gone down and down and down in its facilities, and I think this is a great way of upgrading that for the whole of that community down there, and I think I fully support it.
Alderman Pearce, did I see your interest in speaking? Any other speakers? Alderman Thurley.
I would just like to say that as a resident of Lauderdale, it's really, really heartening to see that this development take place, and it can only enhance the area and improve the shopping experience for the people of Lauderdale, who are entitled to expect that they should have reasonably high standard shopping facilities. So this is really, really welcomed.
Motion before the Chair is for approval. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Final planning matter is 11.3.7, which is a subdivision application at 101 Canopus Road, Mount Rumney, 3-lot subdivision. And I believe that Acting General Manager has got a slight amendment here.
Yeah.
2-lot subdivision.
Right, yes. I'd just like Bruce to just explain the variation in the recommendation.
And I'll take you as moving it.
Yes.
The application's been incorrectly described as a 3-lot subdivision. There's 2 existing titles, and the proposal is to go further 2 lots, so it's basically 2 into 4. And whereas that doesn't really affect the overall assessment of the application, it does have an effect on the in-space contribution, which is to be applied only to additional lots. So the condition should therefore be applied to just 2 lots rather than 3 as currently stated.
Thank you. Seconder? Alderman Hume, thank you. Alderman Chong, would you like to speak to the motion?
Just very briefly, Mr Mayor, I think with the closure of the observatory, it's good to see this land being used. Seek council support.
The other speakers? Motion before the chair for approval. All those in favour? Carried unanimously, and that concludes our business as a planning authority. Moving on, there's nothing under customer service, asset management on financial management. So under governance we have 11.7.1 Public Art Code implementation procedures. The recommendation is that we adopt procedures and guidelines. Thank you, Alderman Chong. Seconder? Thank you, Alderman Bonberto. Speakers?
Look, I think this was discussed fairly extensively at the workshop, and hopefully any questions that came out of that. So I seek support.
Thank you, Alderman Bonberto.
Just to say that it's been important to actually go through and look at the appropriate procedures to actually implement the policy concerned. Thank you.
Alderman Dowse, did you wish to speak to this? Other speakers? Alderman Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is directed, I think, to Mr. Toohey in his capacity as chair, steering this matter through our workshop, and perhaps he may need to take it on notice. There was a decision made in this forum some weeks ago in relation to the development here in Rosny Park, up near the Bayfield Street, top end of Bayfield Street. And in that motion there was a reference to the art, public art, and there was also a clause that if they decided to create public open space, that may constitute not proceeding with an actual sculpture or public piece. Can you just give me an idea or update me in relation to that as to whether or not we are going to get a sculpture or a public work of art on that site, or is the public open space going to be in lieu of? Please.
For you, Mr. Mayor, no, there'll be some public artwork if the development proceeds.
All right. Any other speakers? Alderman Walker.
Look, I acknowledge the history around this policy, and I acknowledge the less badness of Council's approach, which was to move from an appallingly low $500,000 threshold for a contribution up to $1 million. $500,000 for a commercial project is a pittance, and so whilst it's now a threshold of $1 million, that's less bad, but the bottom line is I fundamentally, philosophically oppose this contribution. It's a tax, that's all it is, a tax on new development. Now it's been hypothecated for a lovely purpose, but it's a tax. If someone's looking at setting up a dental practice, they're not going to have change from $1 million. They can buy an existing practice and pay nothing, but if they want to create some jobs, stimulate some activity, improve the capital value of our area and build their own freestanding thing, they get clobbered with this. Do you want public art? Yes, I do, but it should be funded through a general rate process, not punishing people for going ahead and trying to create commercial activity and enterprise. I won't be supporting this.
Because I thought I'd be the only one tonight speaking against this too, so I'm pleased to see that someone else thinks similar to what I do. And I'm not against public art, but you know, like a lot of people here, I've been overseas and I haven't left the country and I say, geez, that's got great public art. You know, I agree with Alderman James. I think it's, when we've got such low, we've got high unemployment here, we're trying to get people to develop in this place, Tasmania and Clarence, and then all of a sudden now we're just going to hit them with something else. I'm not against this, I just think it's a wrong time. I really believe it's a wrong time to be implementing something like this when we're trying to get development here. Look, you know, as I said, I've been to overseas countries and I've never really thought, geez, you know, haven't they got great public art? I wish we had that in Clarence. No, I haven't. I do believe it is a tax on business. I believe it's a cost at the moment that is unjustified. I just think this is the wrong time to be implementing this, that's all.
Thank you.
I did make a big note across my page here that I felt it had an anti-development sentiment in that it targets new developments only. But I notice it says that it's a council's public art fund to be allocated to public art on public land. So whoever funds this doesn't have ownership over the artwork. It's on public land. It's not on their own particular development. Is that how I read this?
Through you, Mr Mayor, the developer has a choice. They can commission their own public artwork, which can be in the building as long as it's accessible to the public, or alternatively, if they don't wish to do their own commissioning, they can make a contribution to Council's Public Art Fund. And Council will then, within a period of 2 years, commission some public work of art in that precinct.
I'm inclined, $1 million is not a huge, I mean, it's a huge figure in some respects, but as far as development goes, it's a little bit of a crushing sort of extra cost on top of that sort of thing. They're my queries in relation to this, is the fact that could be seen as a handout for some extra funds when people are trying to actually contribute a bit more to our community with their development. So I'm still, I'm not quite with it at the moment.
Any other speakers? Right, reply, Alderman Chong.
Point out that what we're voting on tonight is the implementation procedures and the guidelines for developers. We as a council passed this policy before. We passed the cultural arts plan and the public arts policy, and we set these limits as a council. We agreed to them. This is the wrong place to be saying you don't agree to them, because this is about how you implement it. It's not about actually making those decisions. And it's also interesting that when our new planning scheme went out on public exhibition for comment, there were no comments received in relation to this policy. Now, there were plenty of comments from developers and potential developers, and I find it really hard to imagine that if they thought it was a dreadful tax and an impost on development, that there would not have been a whole series of comments, both at the time the policy was being discussed and at the time our planning scheme was being discussed. I think this is all about how we put this procedure, this policy that we agreed to before, into play. I think we should support it. Thank you.
So the officer's recommendation before the chair is that we adopt procedures and guidelines for public art code. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Item 11.7.2 is the Customer Service Charter. Thank you, Alderman Chong. Seconder?
I'll second that.
Alderman Von Berto, thank you. Speakers?
Yes, I missed the workshop where this was apparently discussed quite extensively. I have read it, but I think it would be good to support it.
Alderman Von Berto.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Fairly minor changes, and it looks as though our customer service charter is serving us well, and will continue to do so.
Any other speakers? Alderman Jones.
I would like to see clarification from Mr Gibbs, because I believe he is the person to answer this. On page 195, it refers to, amongst other things, standards, and it says the section has a number of changes, including, for example, dot point 2, replacing the 42 days for progress of planning and subdivision applications with 28 days for permitted applications and 42 days for discretionary applications. My question through you to Mr Gibbs is that should a council, should a DA not be able to be dealt with within 42 days, and then the council officer has the
seeks advice from the applicant as to whether he or she will grant an extension of time so that council can deal with the application. Should, in the case of where the applicant says no, that I will not grant an extension, which officer has the delegation to say, okay, I have received enough information to satisfy myself that we should approve it. Alternatively, no, I can refuse it. What officer has that authority to say yay or nay to the developer on the basis that it will not obviously meet in 42 days for council to consider it?
If the application isn't concerned within 42 days.
Not the question I asked, Mr. Gibbs.
Just a moment, I understand the question. I think Mr Van der Heck might be able to throw a bit of light onto it.
The council has delegated authority to the management service manager to, in that circumstance, where the applicant is disinclined to extend the period of time for assessment.
Yes.
To make a determination with respect to those applications.
Thank you very much.
Welcome. Any other comments? Any other speakers? Okay, right, a reply I think was Alderman John. Okay, so the recommendation is we adopt the new customer service charter. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Item 11.7.3 is the publishing of closed meeting decisions. Alderman Pearce.
Mayor, can I move option 3?
Certainly. Do we have a seconder for option 3? Alderman Cusick, thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Cusick. Mayor, option 3 is to continue the publication of certain closed meeting decisions to the public minutes without disclosure of motion details and how votes were cast. Now, as we know, when items go in closed committee, in closed meeting, that we cannot discuss virtually anything about the decision or the item, because a lot of things like tenders are in confidence and you've got commercial in confidence and other things that may be appropriate staffing matters and things like that are held in closed meetings, and things by under the Act have got to be behind in closed meetings. Now, I think it's very difficult if the details of how people voted for or against was disclosed, and then people saying, well, why did you oppose that? And you say, well, I can't really talk about it. All I did was on the night I felt this was the right decision. So I believe, for sanity, I think option 3 is by far the best to go ahead with. I've looked at the options 1 and 2, and I'm afraid that, no, I do not support them. I think option 3 is the best.
Seconder? Alderman Cusick.
I support Alderman Pearce's motion. I think that once something has gone into closed meeting, aldermen are all allowed to discuss it with persons outside that meeting, divulge any details of discussion, details of advice given by professional external persons or council officers, reasons for reaching a particular decision. Advice might well recommend a particular course of action for a whole number of reasons. For instance, if it's a letter contract, alderman may be advised that the supplier ABC is not up to standard or the goods are inferior. That cannot be discussed outside the meeting. Therefore, if voting details are published, there is no context, no information, no data available to the public to decide whether it was a good or bad decision. So why publish the voting details? If aldermen are not allowed to give reasons, but simply say, because I thought it was the right decision, I don't think it makes much sense. I would hope aldermen always vote in a way where they thought it was the right decision. So therefore I support Alderman Pearce with option 3.
Look, I also support option 3. I think it's trying to get the balance right, and it sets ourselves up benchmarking very well with other councils. If you want to have a Glasnost Fest, great, go for it. Discuss, open, put everything on the record. I can look in the video camera now and say I've never ingested alcohol before a council meeting. I can say now I've never at any time been subject to any inquiries or contacts. I've never had any complaints of anything that I'm aware of. So if you want to get into a Glasnost Fest, by all means go and knock yourself out. If you don't, that's fine, but I'm interested to see your sort of rationale for option 2.
Alderman Hume.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too support option 3, and the reason I do is because it is very difficult to be accountable for a decision if you can't explain the context for it. I think you've heard that rationale for supporting option 3 repeated by a couple of aldermen already, but I think it's a very powerful argument. How can I explain to someone if they approach me about a particular decision? Whereas if it's in open meeting, the report's there, I can actually explain, why I disagree with the report, etc. But I think the issue goes a bit further than that, in that when some of the kinds of issues that are considered in closed meeting are considered, and there is a good reason why they're in closed meeting. Some of them are commercial decisions where information is commercial in confidence. Some of them are legal decisions, which means that the council may be a party to some kind of legal dispute. And if people who are parties to those issues, whether they be people applying for tenders or people trying to go into some commercial arrangement with council, or someone with a legal dispute with council, and you have a voting record that's close, that's actually something that people could exploit for their commercial or for their own legal purposes. And so I think having those voting records on such sensitive decisions can open up a bit of a can of worms. I'm very happy to be accountable for and to explain all of the decisions that I make. My voting record when it comes to decisions that are open council, including planning decisions, which is something where we're given a lot less discretion than we otherwise might have. But I do have a fundamental problem with being held accountable for a decision for which I can't explain the rationale for which I voted, and for which the reasons behind the decision are, for very good reasons, secret and also rather sensitive. So I'm in favour of option 3.
Okay, other speakers. Alderman James.
I'm not in favour of this option at all, and I suppose over the years I've always stood by the process that decision making in this place should be open and transparent, and for that reason I am prepared to support the current arrangement in this place, and that is option 2. And the current arrangement that we currently operate under is that council, it's option 2, continue with the publication of certain closed meetings decisions in the public minutes, including motion details and how votes were cast. That's what we currently do. And people can now, if this motion is carried tonight, then the members of the public who can view the minutes and even seek to ask questions about items that appear on the agenda, and they are aware of that because the agenda papers that the public have list all items, including those items in closed meeting. They currently know that. There's no change to that, and there'll be no change to it, notwithstanding if option 3 gets up tonight, which is saying that the publication of certain closed meeting decisions in the public minutes without disclosure of the motion details on how votes were cast. That is what the motion is before the Chair, and currently we are able to publish decisions in closed meeting and indicate in the minutes how members around the circle in this council voted. Now, I have no problem at all if a person rings me and says, Richard, and I prefer Richard rather than Alderman, Richard, why did you vote on this closed meeting item, which is tender 546/2016? Why did you vote that way? I have no problem to say I voted because I believed it was the right decision, and I cannot divulge the information relating to that. Now, they could huff and puff till the cows come home, but I would not deviate from that decision because it's in closed meeting. But I believe they have the right to know how we vote on issues, whether they're in open or closed meeting, because they need to know not the substance of that particular issue, but how you voted. Because at the end of the day, it may be perceived that we have something to conceal with respect to closed meeting items if our votes are not recorded. And I don't think that is the right thing that should happen. Secrecy, that is where it's sort of sitting as far as I'm concerned. If we support and deviate from our current practice of providing and publication of certain council minutes, including and how votes were cast, that's our current situation, and move to a clandestine situation, then I believe we are basically moving away from what I think is appropriate as part of this open and transparency process in our decision-making process. I will not support it. I would support option 2, which is continuing with our current practice of making public how we voted on issues.
Alderman Doust.
Mr. Mayor, I also support the idea of option 2. I've got great trepidation about maintaining or increasing secrecy or lack of transparency. I mean, you could take option 3 and then you could then probably have an option 4 and extend it further and further. I don't agree with that. I reckon, we should be as open as possible. I know you say that we can't divulge tender things and all this sort of stuff, but as Alderman James said, well, I voted because I thought it was the best way. I can't discuss the details because it's against the law, and that's the end of the matter. But I still think option 2 should be continued with. I don't really agree with option 3 at all.
Other speakers. Alderman Chong.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I confess, like Alderman James and Alderman Doust, I would probably prefer option 2. I don't have a problem with people knowing how I voted, and I'm quite comfortable saying it's commercial in confidence, it's a legal matter, I can't tell you the information, but that was what I believe was the best answer on the night. I think as a council, we are quite transparent. Generally, we consider very little in closed meeting, other than those things that we absolutely have to. But I think it is important that people understand what decisions we make and what our views are on these things.
Alderman Bomberto.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also support option 2. I think it's important to note some of the wording in all of these, well, option 2 and option 3. It actually says certain closed meeting decisions. As we're aware, not all closed council meeting decisions actually are put into the public minutes, and including, for instance, in option 2, the motion details and how the votes were cast. It depends on the particular item as to whether or not it actually is reported on in the public minutes. And I also agree that I am more than happy for the public to know how I voted in relation to those items that actually are recorded in the public minutes. And I think it's really important that if we're going to have that closed meeting decision, then the motion details actually give more context to the actual decision. I also think that it's important to note that since at least, I think it's June 2015, we have actually been using option 2. So I think we need to think very, very carefully before we actually change that, because there's an expectation as far as the community is concerned now, and we need to have good reason to actually change to using another focus. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Alderman Thurley.
I was just going to say, Mr Mayor, that this practice has been in place since June 2015, and I've on the impression that we were just going to, the need for this was to formalise it rather than consider varying from it, because I am of the belief that it functions quite well and it's quite satisfactory. I don't know whether one recent query leads to changing that.
Any other speakers? Right, reply, Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor. The reason I moved option 3, and a lot of people have said tonight, they don't care if people ring them up and ask them to vote. But I find it rather strange, we only go into closed committee for certain reasons, and that's under the Act. And if it's very nature, like staff matters and things like that, cannot be disclosed. Now, most of us don't care if people know how we voted, but what does get me somewhat, if someone rings me up and say you voted against this, and I say, yes, I did. I thought it was the right decision at the time, but I cannot disclose it. Then they ring 11 other aldermen, and we all say exactly the same thing. Repetition. Now, I've got to admit, that does look silly. I mean, we don't go into closed meetings for nothing. And the fact is, when we make a decision in closed meeting, we cannot divulge that next week, the week after, or ever. It remains confidential. And that's not our fault. That's the Act's fault. That's not our fault. So the fact is, if we divulge anything, then we can be in trouble, we can be in strife. And they've got higher authorities in this council that can punish us for disclosing things. So I've moved option 3, I support option 3, and I hope you will support option 3.
Thank you, Alderman Pearce. So that the option before us is option 3, moved by Alderman Pearce. All those in favour? Against? The motion is lost.
I'll move up option 2 then, and I'll stand up.
Thank you. Speak to it.
No.
Any other speakers? Alderman Walker.
Yes, I noticed no one took up the Glasnost Fest opportunity. We like transparency, but only so much in a pragmatic kind of way. What's the proper thing to do in this case? Let's talk about it. There are 29 councils. And only Transparency Central, which as everybody knows is Flinders Island, is currently operating at option 2. Basically, every other council, if we take ourselves out of the mix, is at option 1. So we are the most transparent and open city council, but again, we're choosing to pick and choose about how proud and wonderful we are as we debate this tonight. Where's the appropriate thing to sort this out and be consistent and not be this mumble jumble of different things at different places, which is what we're trying to do in other areas like standardised planning processes? I would suggest that the best and appropriate place to be looking at this matter would be when the Minister and as the Minister's process for reviewing the Local Government Act, this is possibly the opportunity where matters like this should be looked at. We're just taking it on the fly. And just another thing on that, we never ratified back in June. When this process changed, we never ratified. It never came before us. It was never spelled out like that. It was an interpretation taken at some level and just run at that point. Another interesting thing would be to know how it rolls as well, because I can't discuss things in closed council. I can show my voting record, but I do note that there have been things that have been since this new period that have come out, and they show the voting record. They might not show that before that decision was made there was another decision that was a different one to it. It only shows that. So we're not, this idea that we're awesome, we've got all our ducks lined up with option 2 is a false one, but knock yourselves out.
Any other speakers? Alderman Cusick.
I'll take up Alderman Walker's point there. My understanding is that we agreed in June to publish the decision in closed meetings. And if we adopt option 2, we are changing that. Because I do not believe that we agree to publish voting details, to publish decisions with voting details. I believe that's an officer's interpretation or an officer's addition, but I may be wrong.
A reply? The motion then is option 2. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Item 12 is Alderman's question time. There are no questions on notice. Item 12.4, questions without notice. Alderman James.
Yes, I have one question, Mr Mayor, to you. Is it possible to change the venue for the Governor's visit from Blunston Arena to either the barn or up to the where we have had it before? It's not there yet, Pete.
Order.
To the Senior Six venue, which we have used in the past with Mayor Edwards up in Allen Street. So is it possible to change the venue, given that I think the Governor's coming to us in early March, something like that? So through you, Mr Mayor, is it possible to change the venue at this stage to another location within the city?
Well, I guess anything's possible, Alderman James. It's the fact is that we have now locked in a visit from the Governor and everything's been put in place, including bookings made for a venue. I imagine if our reasons were strong enough, we could change it, but are you able to sort of expand on what those reasons might be? I mean, it's question time.
I would, and it's for reasons that could be perceived by the community that we are endorsing Blunston Arena as one of our civic reception centres, and I feel a little bit uncomfortable about that. That's just me, because of.
I'm sorry, if you can only expand the question, it's not the argument.
I'll leave it at that. I think most people understand where I'm coming from.
Okay. All right. Alderman Wolf, have you got any questions?
Yes, I do. Look,
Open voting reasons. Oh, sorry.
That's
point of order. Point of order myself.
Just a matter that comes up from time to time, and it's not the head of power and the responsibility of council and its officers to deal with antisocial behaviour around hooning and other things. However, there is potentially things we can be doing to sort of help in that space, and I'm just wondering how recently was the last time that we applied to do a Safer Streets program or applied for funding under that program that to deliver effective solutions to local areas experiencing problems with criminal and antisocial behaviour.
Are you able to answer that question?
Through you, Mr Mayor, we'll have to take that on notice. I just
None come to your mind at the top of your head?
No.
No.
If we could perhaps have an answer in the weekly briefing report today. Alderman Phillip?
Just a quick question to ask in relation to underutilised halls in our community. Is council considering some incentives to get those halls utilised?
That might be...
Not sold, utilised.
The Governor Hall.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Been going a long time, and I'm sure this will be a question I noticed, but where are we at with the Cambridge Master Plan?
Cambridge Master Plan?
Cambridge Master Plan?
Who's got that?
Mr Mayor, just have to meet the takeaway shop owners.
Do you anticipate coming to a workshop first?
Yes.
And rough time frame?
Well, hopefully we can get it in before the budget session starts.
Alderman here? Alderman Cusick? Alderman Dowse? Alderman Pearce?
Me, can I ask the question? When will Quarry Road, the rubbish in Quarry Road be cleaned up? And
Order.
the listing came in yesterday and says front two will be in a spot.
It's a very good question. Mr. Tui, have we got a response to that, please?
No, for instance, I'll take up and I'll like your brief this week.
I think I've responded to him saying it would be done pretty quickly, so I would appreciate that. Alderman Umberto.
Thank you. I've got two questions, Mr Mayor. What consideration has been made by the Tracks and Trails Committee in relation to the current trails of Rugby and Lauderdale since Council received the Commissioner for Police's response? That's my first question.
Would you stand, please?
I can answer the first for you. As I mentioned at our last meeting, we'll look at options. The next step is to write to the Premier and draw his attention to the difficulty that the Tracks and Trails Committee has in relation to the continuation of the police decision in relation to that's not under the signature of the Tracks and Trails. That is something that I am doing separately in order to at least try all avenues and see if we can get a response, And secondly, in the letter to the Premier, I will be drawing his attention to the feasibility of the multi-purpose pathway along the South Arm Highway, whether or not that's an option that's going to be considered by the government either in the short or the long term. And if it's in the short term, if he could provide us with some time frame in relation to that. So that's in the process of being done. Not as chairman of the Tracks and Trails, this is something that I'll be doing as an alderman, referring to the debate that's occurred in the community, and therefore I'll be stepping back and would not be seeking to involve the Tracks and Trails Committee or the Council in any way that could be seen to be using the chairmanship of a council committee to sort of influence council's decision.
Thank you, Alderman James. I note that you won't be talking on behalf of council in this regard or committee. Did you have a second question?
Mr Mayor, as a supplementary to that one, I asked the question what consideration has been made by the Tracks and Trails Committee. So thank you, Alderman James, for your response, but that's not necessarily the Tracks and Trails Committee.
There was considerable debate at our meeting on the 11th of February, and I sat back and listened, and a lot of the members were very unhappy with the response from the Commissioner of Police, and some of them were very vocal because already there is public access across the academy land. Anybody can cross the land and not be basically told you are trespassing or so on. So I just let it simmer at that stage and said that I would like to follow it up on a personal basis, and that's where no discussion ceased.
The committee hasn't made any decision.
There's been no decision, and I forgot tonight to table, they are the December meeting minutes, but in the minutes that I'll be tabling at the next council. What's the fuss? Because people can already cross the land, you know, and that is recorded in the minutes. That's
Have a second question, Alderman Bomberto?
Has there been any consideration, deliberation by council officers or elected members as to a multi-user pathway adjacent to the South Arm Highway from Oakdowns to Lauderdale, since receiving advice from the Department of State Growth that this request will need to be included in a bid to be part of a 10-year infrastructure investment plan?
I hope that council has made a decision that that was an option. Just wondering, have we progressed on that? Perhaps next workshop you can report back on where we're at with that, because I thought that we were going to raise it with the Minister, but I'm not sure. Thank you. We have been around. There's not an opportunity to revisit the round. Sorry? Well, aldermen are entitled to ask a second question, and there is nothing in the rules about the order that given that opportunity. So I'm willing to entertain a second question.
My question through the chair perhaps is to Mr Graham, because the last time that I was anywhere near the police academy, I saw a sign and it said not to be present on these grounds unless here for police business. Question is, Mr Graham, could you check whether that sign actually exists on there so that we can actually let Alderman James know? Richard.
Certainly. Thank you. A second question from you, Alderman James. Sorry.
No, and in relation to the, I think we need to sort out, perhaps as a council, whether committees and chairs of committees are able to go off on their own agendas when council has another agenda.
Not to the extent that we're talking about here, but there's nothing to stop any member of the public, indeed an alderman, taking personal action. Alderman James.
A lot of, what do you call it, anxiety about the new Rossley Park, what do you call it,
development
the skate park. Sorry, I've just lost the words. And there was a decision to have the opening at the end of February. That was what we were told. You know, that there was going to be a gala event.
So the question?
The question is, are we still on track to have that opening on the end of February, which is next week?
Through you, Mr Mayor, the completion date is probably going to be at the end of sometime in March. The people that are currently doing the work have encountered a few large rocks that need a bit of special attention, so it's been delayed by a couple of weeks. Yes, it is planned to have an opening, and the scheduled date is Sunday the 3rd of April. Yes, Sunday the 3rd of April, in the about midday. And yes, it'll be
Thanks. Does anybody else want to ask their second question that missed out on the first one? In that case, I'll invite a motion to go into committee. Thank you, Alderman Pearce. Second, Alderman Cusick. All those in favour?